the secret war that occurred between Israel and the Soviet Union.
Today we'll be looking at a little-known episode from modern history, when Israel and the Soviet Union went to war.
I believe we're talking about the Six-Day War.
During the height of the Cold War in the 1960s, the Soviet Union deliberately opposed US influence all over the globe. Perceiving Israel as a US ally in the Middle East, the Soviets supported Arab countries that frequently clashed with Israel.
And you got to keep in mind, during the 1960s, what was the U.S. doing? We were too busy in a place called Vietnam.
It was during one of these wars that the Soviet Union sent its own troops, planes, and air defense systems to participate in a war against Israeli defense forces.
I was just learning how they occupied the Sinai Peninsula and they closed the Suez for like 7 years there. Oh no, sorry, 15 years. They occupied that Egyptian territory for 15 years. Meanwhile, the Suez was closed for a total of 8 years after 1967 to 1975.
In June 1967, Israel successfully launched surprise attacks against Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. During the Six-Day War, Israeli defense forces destroyed and captured hundreds of enemy airplanes, tanks, and artillery guns.
Something to slightly keep in mind in the new area of the Middle East is that a lot of these countries are kind of brand new, Israel included. Like, this was just after decolonization. I mean, I guess decolonization is still really happening in the French Empire, the former French colonies, the British colonies.
By the war's end, Israel controlled the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, Old City of Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights.
Yeah, a lot of these places had just become independent nations just like a decade or two earlier.
In the aftermath, the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, initially announced his resignation, but backtracked after mass demonstrations in his favor. Israel agreed to a ceasefire.
That's crazy. This man tried to step down and they protested to make him come back. That would suck. If I'm just trying to retire, I'm like, bro, I don't want to go back to work.
Due to intense pressure by the USSR. Arab states used it to regain strength for a new war. By September, Arab states formulated the so-called Three No's policy that forbade peace, recognition, or negotiations with Israel. President Nasser believed only military efforts would achieve a full Israeli withdrawal from Sinai. With Israeli forces at the eastern bank of the Suez Canal, conflict resumed through limited artillery duels along the canal and small-scale commando.
I don't know if he's going to talk about it, but of course Israel would have loved for us to come in, the U.S., come in and somehow provide even more support. But like I said earlier in this video, we were a little too busy in Vietnam, especially 67. I mean, things were really heating up in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. Remember, like Cambodia, Laos kind of included in all that.
Incursions. But to push Israelis out of the Sinai, Egypt needed to rebuild its armed forces, and this is where the Soviets came in. Between 1965 and 1970, the Soviet Union provided Egypt with over $3 billion in military aid. Egypt's tanks in 1965 were Soviet T-54s and T-55s.
Yeah, like how he said earlier, the Soviet Union in the beginning saw Israel as like this, kind of Western allied sort of thing. Like, they definitely weren't a fan of the state of Israel, and it was going to be a lot easier for them to get the former British and French colonies on the Soviet side because, the colonizers fight the colonizers.
They had used
things
Soviet
like that.
air defense systems like the S-75 Dvina. Its air
fight the Western world. They're obviously allied to Israel also at this time, Western Europe.
Force flew old Soviet-made fighter planes such as MiG-19s, MiG-17s, and Sukhoi Su-7s. Additionally, the USSR sent its officers and technical experts to help train Egypt's army and air force.
Remember that there was also a conflict a couple years, like 7 years before this, 8 years before that, the Suez Crisis that occurred, which was kind of a weird conflict there. Weirdly, kind of having the Soviets and the U.S. on the same side, strangely enough. And that was, I guess, the final blow to the former European empires. That was the last time. It was like the USA and the Soviet Union, the great powers at the time, were like, hey, you guys, you're the old guard. You're kind of out of this. You kind of are not as important as you think you are.
By 1969, just 2 years after the grave defeat in the Six-Day War, Egypt felt confident enough for large-scale military operations. While Israel Defense Forces used better equipment and tactics, the Egyptian army had more manpower and more artillery. It was seemingly more capable of waging a lengthy and costly static war against Israel. On March 8, 1969, President Nasser proclaimed the official launch of the War of Attrition. Its goal was to force the Israelis out of Sinai, using large-scale shelling, commando raids and aerial warfare. Battles mainly happened on the Egyptian-Israeli front, with a lesser eastern front that included Iraqi, Jordanian, Palestinian and Syrian forces. Initially, Egyptians inflicted considerable losses on the Israelis using heavy artillery as well as new fighter jets like the MiG-21.
Again, I think it's also important to keep in context, because we're specifically bringing up the Soviet Union and their participation in this whole ordeal, is the Cold War. I mean, that is the big... I think people, especially nowadays, forget the much bigger thing that was happening around the world, which was the Cold War. When talking about the Six-Day War, everyone's obviously focusing on Israel versus this massive, Arab coalition. But remember, this was just one of so many other chaotic things that were happening in this world. A massive brawl between these two superpowers, the USA and the Soviet Union.
Egyptians also had newly delivered Soviet surface-to-air missile systems and the P-15 mobile early warning radars. Israel used US fighters like the A-4 Skyhawk and the French Dassault Mirage 3. By June 1969, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir faced growing losses. In response, she escalated Israeli attacks through the so-called asymmetrical response of disproportionately large retaliation to every enemy attack.
This is random to bring up, but this is why, when Joe Biden was president here in the U.S., that dude was so old. He was, what was he? I think he was 27. Wasn't he born in 1940, 1930, something like that? He was an adult man when this was happening. To see him age from seeing Israel, he literally saw Israel become a state in his lifetime. He remembers a time when there was no Israel, and then boom, there was an Israel. Then he sees this massive coalition during the Six-Day War, and then obviously when he was president in 2024, 2020, things like that. What a crazy transition. I think a lot of the old people, they kind of still remember this event, and they still kind of a lot of old people still have that Cold War mindset. And I don't even blame them, because they don't know anything else. They were born in a Cold War world, and it basically defined the entire, first 40 years of their life, sometimes even longer than that. I mean, the max is about 45 years of their life. So they still kind of just continued to see the world as a Cold War world where, boom, it's the USA versus Russia or the Soviet Union, even after it dissolved, and that's still their number one mindset. And that's a strange way to look at it for us, for if you're my age or younger, because I don't even remember the Cold War. I was never alive during the Cold War.
In July, during Operation Boxer, Israeli Air Force eliminated numerous Egyptian defensive positions along the western bank of the Suez Canal. In August, their combat jets flew around 1,000 sorties against Egypt. In September, Israeli Defense Forces launched their sole land offensive in the war, called Operation Raviv. In it, Israeli troops managed to destroy 12 enemy outposts by using previously captured Arab tanks.
Bro, D-Day type invasion across the Red Sea, basically? That's crazy.
Pretending to be Egyptian soldiers. Thanks to this tactic and newly delivered F-4 Phantom II fighter jets, by the end of 1969, the Israelis pretty much destroyed Egypt's air defense systems. This allowed them to start deep penetration raids against enemy targets in the Nile Valley and beyond.
Operation Caucasus? In
Faced
the Caucasus
with growing
Mountains? I don't
opposition
think
as
so.
well as with the prospect of losing another war, Egyptian President Nasser secretly traveled to Moscow. It was January 1970 when he asked the Soviets for additional help. Nasser knew that the control of the air was crucial. He asked the Soviets not only to replace surface-to-air missile batteries lost to Israelis, but also to provide Egypt with more sophisticated SAM systems, like the S-125 Niva, self-propelled Shellcuts, and the lightweight shoulder-fired Strela 2.
I'm trying to think all the other things that are happening in the context of this for the Soviet Union. I mean, obviously, if I'm the Soviet Union, I'm watching America, well, you don't really know. It's still kind of the early days. I wouldn't say I'm watching America, kill themselves in Vietnam. It's only 1967. Maybe, because we'd already been fighting there for a couple of years, but it was really starting to escalate quite a bit in Vietnam. But all the other things, I mean, again, you got to consider, it was just a little bit earlier, 6 years earlier that we almost destroyed the world in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And there's a lot of people in the upper powers of the Soviet Union that didn't love that. The Soviets didn't like that they almost caused a nuclear apocalypse either. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Meanwhile, you kind of just see Israel as this like Western backed force, and you don't like that. Obviously, Egypt is going to be way more on your side than, you have to prioritize Egypt here.
That way, Egypt would once again have...
But they are obviously sending things to Vietnam. Oh, also keep in mind the Sino-Soviet split. That's beginning to kind of happen if it has not already happened. The Sino-Soviet split, in a way, somewhat even helped the North Vietnamese because allegedly, basically, they were getting... The North Vietnamese, there was a competition between China and the Soviet Union to see who could give more stuff to the Viet Cong. And because, they were kind of fighting Mao and... who is it, Khrushchev, that was leading them right now?
An effective air shield. Initially, the Soviets were hesitant about sending additional military aid.
Is it Brezhnev, or is he actually the leader already?
Worried that this might trigger an armed response by the US.
My bad. So Khrushchev just got eliminated. He was just ousted.
However, Nasser threatened to resign and warned his successor might be more pro-Western. Eventually, General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev...
That's the thing. That's the way... Oh, okay, so Brezhnev is still General Secretary. So Khrushchev is still the leader of the Soviet Union at this time?
Obliged him. While Nasser wanted the Soviets to send their military aid openly to intimidate the Israelis, Brezhnev refused. Instead, the Red Army launched a covert operation codenamed Caucasus.
I think at this time, all the world, like I just mentioned, the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think we both stared death down in the face so intensely that there's a big movement to be like a little bit more. I mean, obviously there's still definitely a Cold War happening under the surface, but it's not, we can't just go guns a-blazing now. Both sides are like, maybe we should bring down the temperature a bit.
The Soviets focused on bolstering Egypt's defenses, expressing no interest in attacking Israel and thus provoking the US. In the following months, the Soviets sent...
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting. I mean, I would assume, if the Soviet Union attacked Israel, then America probably would bring direct aid, maybe even boots on the ground, even if they are fighting a pretty tough war in Vietnam.
To Egypt, their own regular military servicemen, experienced with Soviet equipment. They sent the 18th Special Anti-Aircraft Rocket Division. It featured 24 anti-aircraft missile batteries and 4 support batteries. Also sent was an aviation group consisting of 135th Fighter Aviation Regiment and the 35th Fighter Squadron. Between them, the two units had around 70 MiG-21 fighter jets. The Soviet Union transported most of these units by merchant ships. The ships were misleadingly listed as carrying agriculture equipment. Weapons and vehicles were hidden in cargo holds, while soldiers were forbidden from appearing on upper decks.
I mean, people forget, this was literally the back door. This was the backyard of the Soviet Union. I mean, that guy did not have to sail that far to get these things over there. Literally from the Black Sea, just got to get through that Bosphorus Strait. Of course, Turkey's in NATO at this time, and so is Greece. But, if you mislabel it, it's all good. But this is literally kind of, in a way, the backyard of the massive Soviet Union at this time. And you got a little fight going on back there. So, of course, they're going to want to aid a little bit.
Once they arrived in Alexandria, the ships were unloaded during the night. Troops traveled by road and rail to previously scouted positions near the Suez Canal.
Oh, this is random. Another kind of important fact, though, especially at this time, Iran is currently more allied to the U.S. This is pre-Iranian Revolution 1979, so it's not like they can just... send things through Iran and then the Persian Gulf and then Iran. I don't know why you would do that. That would kind of be a messy situation. But just keep in mind, Iran at this time, believe it or not, is more Western allied with the Shah. It wouldn't be till 79 where obviously Iran despises the U.S.
In January 1970, there were between 2,500 and 4,000 Soviet soldiers, officers and technicians in Egypt. By the end of June, there were at least 12,000 of them.
By 1970, the U.S. is certainly not trying to get involved in any of this. I mean, we already got a disaster going on in Vietnam. And I mean, I'm sure there's definitely some generals and some upper powers in the U.S. government that's already trying to think, how the hell do we get the F out of here? I mean, we completely withdrawed by 1973, but at this point, January 1970, I mean, I think we might even be trying to slowly pull some things back. Oh yeah, we've already began initial withdrawals by 1969. And remember, at this time, I mean, the American public is so sick of the Vietnam War. Like, imagine if the U.S. had to, for some reason, go in and help Israel at this time. Like, there was going to be no support, no matter who was in charge of the U.S., whether it's Democrat or Republican or whoever. The U.S. public was just not going to take any more of this.
Some estimates claim that at one point there were over 20,000 Soviet personnel in Egypt. In the Soviet Union,
Wow.
soldiers loaded Antonov An-12 cargo planes with the dismantled MiG-21 planes during the winter. A couple of hours later, they landed in sunny Egypt, carrying not just MiG-21s, but also snow, which delighted the Egyptians. Soviet soldiers were at first quite happy about the change of climate. Despite being banned from doing so, they secretly sunbathed and ended with sunburns and sunstrokes.
Wow.
In the desert, fleas and bed lice were the least of the soldiers' worries,
Wow.
while snakes and scorpions started sneaking into their hideouts. Soldiers stationed near the river Nile suffered swarms of flies and
Jeez.
mosquitoes. Dysentery and other tropical diseases were a constant challenge. The heat was exhausting.
I mean,
All the while, the Soviet government
I gotta admit, if I am a person from Soviet Russia and I'm used to the cold, it would seem like the exact opposite place I would want to be in is the Sahara Desert. And here's the thing, I don't actually know if that's true, because you know what? When I look at migration patterns here in 2025, you see a lot of people that live in a current climate, let's say a hot climate, move to a cold climate. Move to like I'm trying to think what is a specific example. Why am I thinking like the Philippines, Filipinos that move to Canada are choosing to live, or I guess just in general, Canada's cold, but I'm pretty sure there's like a really high rate of Filipinos, which obviously the Philippines is very hot, moving to Canada, moving to very cold areas. You wouldn't see that. So maybe that's just like, maybe that's an outlier. Maybe there are certain people that are just sick of their current weather conditions, and the reason why they move in the first place is so they can get the exact opposite. But if I'm being forced into an area of an exact opposite climate, maybe that's how you get people that are kind of angry and upset, and it's not going to go very well.
government hid its involvement in the war of attrition. Its soldiers wore standard Egyptian army uniforms without any insignia. At
Bro.
least one political officer burned copies of the newspaper meant for the troops, lest they note official denials about the Soviet engagement in a war against Israel.
So they were really trying to keep this hush. Wow. Yeah, I mean, if we catch this at the time, I mean, that's going to be a massive international scandal. I mean, I'm just trying to think if like we caught Soviets fighting for Vietnam. That's like World War III worthy. If we find like a dead Russian soldier that is, I guess, hidden. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we wouldn't say nothing. Maybe we'd be like, man, if we report on this and we tell the whole world, we might be escalating World War III ourselves. Maybe you find this Russian dude that's dressed up like a Viet Cong, and you're like, I don't think we can tell anyone about this, because maybe this is just like one guy. What if it was just one guy? We don't want to blow it up too much. It all depends on how many Soviets would be helping to fight.
Despite
in this case,
all this
20,000.
subterfuge, both the US and Israel were acutely aware of the growing Soviet forces in Egypt. However,
So the US
no
already
one
was
wanted
aware.
to reveal the exact extent
This is exactly what I was saying.
of Soviet engagement in
You wouldn't want to report on it. Like I said, in Vietnam. Like you then also, like that's the weird question about the Cold War. There was times where like, do I escalate this? Like, okay, we just caught the Soviets doing something bad. Now the question is, do I want to escalate this and tell the entire world and possibly threaten World War III that way? So that's literally the situation facing the U.S. right now.
the war. Both the US and the USSR worried this might cause an escalation of the conflict and
That's so
eventually an all-out nuclear war between superpowers.
And again, why else would the U.S. not want to tell the world, even though they knew it, even though they knew the Soviets were helping to fight for Egypt? Because the U.S. public, the American public, this is in the height of the hippie days, the summer of love, 69. The youth is going crazy, literally nuts. I mean, isn't the year 1968 considered the year of protest and all this chaos. I don't know, late 60s in general was a big time. But yeah, I mean, the American youth is going freaking nuts. Imagine you're a college student at this time. You probably know a couple of your friends that died in Vietnam and they didn't want to go in the first place. They got drafted, sent over there, and then boom, dead. You're going to be way more against any other conflict. You're obviously against Vietnam, but imagine if the government at the time was like, okay, now you got to go to Israel. Now you got to go to the Middle East. Strap it up, boys. Get the sand camouflage ready to go, because we got you going to a whole nother part of the earth.
As long as the Soviets kept Operation Caucasus hidden, they could pursue their limited objectives. The Americans could stay out of the crisis, and Israel had to deal merely with a modest Soviet force instead of the entire Eastern Bloc. As for the Israelis, the mere presence of the Red Army served as a deterrent. Israeli Air Force stopped flying missions deep into Egyptian airspace, sticking close to the Suez Canal instead. During a scouting mission in April 1970, their Mirage 3 planes encountered a Soviet air patrol for the first time.
Boy.
Israelis immediately turned back.
Hell yeah, boy. You don't want to face that. Let me tell you, Israel, here's the thing. Everyone wants to keep things de-escalated, but at a certain extent, you do have to you got to be careful. I mean, Israel's got to be extremely careful because they're technically far beyond enemy lines. I mean, I guess Israel's obviously famously not a part of NATO. So you do have NATO members in Turkey and Greece, but you are so far behind it. I mean, even to this day, Israel is kind of far behind enemy lines. But remember, the world, Europe even, is split in half down the middle with the Warsaw Pact, with Poland, and, well, Yugoslavia is independent, but Romania and Bulgaria, like, that whole continent is split down the middle. And they're closer to that side of the continent than obviously the Western Allied side.
Israeli armed forces continued their attacks but were unwilling to start an open war with the Soviets.
That makes sense. So that means the Soviets could probably come down there and maybe whoop you. I mean, it would depend on how much the West wants to get involved. But certainly, if I'm Israel, that's the number one thing. I do not want the Soviets here. I would take the Chinese over here more than the Soviets at this time in 1970 because, I mean, the Chinese are a threat, but the Chinese are a lot further away. This is more, like I said, the Soviet Union backyard, not so much China.
Superpower. Because of this, the Israelis scouted the positions of Soviet manned defenses and studied the patrol routes of their airplanes. Then they deliberately avoided them, focusing their attacks on Egyptian forces instead.
Honestly, smart move.
But the clash was inevitable. On June 22nd, 1970, a pair of Soviet-piloted MiG-21s attacked and pursued an Israeli Skyhawk fighter into the Sinai airspace. According to the Soviet pilots, the Skyhawk went down over the Gulf of Suez. The Israelis claimed the plane was damaged but managed to land. On June 30th, Soviet manned air defenses downed 2 Israeli F-4 Phantoms, not only demonstrating that the Phantom was vulnerable, but also showcased the deadliness of SAM systems like the S-125. A couple of days later, on July 5th, Egyptian and Soviet air defense positions withstood waves of attacks by 24 Israeli jet planes. The Egyptians and Soviets claimed downing 3 jets, while Israel stated it did not lose any. The Egyptian military issued rewards for every enemy aircraft downed.
Dang.
300 Egyptian
That's
pounds.
funny. Don't we do that now? I think Ukraine and Russia are both still using that system like that. There's like drones literally in Ukraine right now. For every like Russian tank or Russian military equipment that you destroy with your drone, you get even more money, which you can purchase more drones and try to destroy more Russian stuff.
For every A4 Skyhawk, 400 for a Mirage 3, and 500 for an F4 Phantom.
Of course.
I
mean, it's still going to economically destroy the other side because they're spending so much more than just 400 pounds, which apparently is worth 920 in 1970. In today's money, it's a US dollar, $6,000. Still a lot cheaper than obviously this stuff that's being produced. I mean, damn, nowadays, like a modern fighter jet is a couple million easily, right? What, 10 million? A tank is like $1 million or something, 3 million.
Additionally, troops received rewards for capturing enemy pilots. This led to some confusion since Egyptian soldiers, at least on one occasion, mistook a downed Soviet pilot for an Israeli.
Of course.
Very quickly, Soviet pilots started displaying an Egyptian coat of arms on their jackets. While Egyptian and Soviet soldiers celebrated their victories,
that's kind of funny. it is kind of funny to see how integrated the Soviet soldiers got into. I mean, they were literally, they had to be basically Egyptian. They basically had to wear Egyptian coats of arms and wear Egyptian stuff, and they were Egyptian briefly. That's hilarious. What a crazy combination of two ethnic groups, Russian and Egyptian.
Israel's aerial supremacy was under serious threat. Avoiding Soviet units was no longer feasible. The Israeli Air Force proposed to attack the Soviets head-on, demonstrating its
Whoa, what is this? A picture of the Maginot Line in World War II?
aerial supremacy was under serious threat. Avoiding Soviet units was no longer feasible. The Israeli Air Force proposed to attack the Soviets head-on, demonstrating its aerial superiority.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely, if we're backed by all the reports, I mean, there's different military heads out there that will tell you, I think, different things, but I'm pretty sure it seems like all the reports is that the U.S. was always ahead for the most part, for the vast majority of the Cold War. The U.S. always had better just air technology, better Air Force, better equipment, better fighters, better bombers, things like that in general during the Cold War. So obviously the Israelis are going to be given that stuff since they're Western allied over the Soviets. That does not mean that they can't, that doesn't mean that they're guaranteed a victory, obviously, though. That's definitely not the case, especially because war constantly changes. Different wars are obviously at different levels of escalation too.
The morning of July 30th
not an all-out
saw
war like
Israeli
World War II.
F-4 planes perform ground strikes near Soviet-controlled airspace in an attempt to aggravate them. Shortly after, an easy prey was deliberately presented. 4 Mirage 3s, which flew in a close formation in a high-altitude pattern made to make them seem like a recon flight of 2 planes. The Soviets finally sent some MiG-21s into the air. Overall, 24 MiGs took off, but not all of them at the same time, and not all participated in the battle. Some were sent to intercept the unidentified recon planes, and some were sent to block possible Israeli exit routes. The Israeli plan called for the decoy Mirage to lure the Soviets into an area where 4 Israeli Phantoms would fly in low, below radar and beneath the MiGs, and then approach them from behind. They would pick them off with their long-ranged radar-guided Sparrow missiles. 4 more Mirage fighters were on station close by to aid them in a possible dogfight. But the maneuvers were wrongly timed, and by the time the Phantoms got close, the Soviets were too close to the decoy Mirage. Afraid of friendly fire, the Israelis went in for a dogfight.
Wow.
Besides the 4 Sparrow missiles, each Phantom also carried 4 heat-seeking Sidewinders.
Literally Top Gun. This is such a Top Gun moment right here.
The Soviet MiG-21s had but a small radar and typically carried 2 heat-seeking missiles. Back then, heat-seeking missiles were not sensitive enough to engage targets head-on.
Keep that in mind. Yeah, keep that in mind. This is still a decade plus before Top Gun and all that technology. This is only 1970 technology.
So most shots had to be taken from behind the enemy, at distances of just a few miles. Some missiles were fired by both sides right from the get-go, with one Russian ATOL missile hitting a Phantom but failing to detonate. The decoying 4 Mirage fighters joined in the fight, leveling the odds, and very shortly thereafter scored 2 kills, killing 1 Soviet pilot. One Soviet MiG scored a hit on one of the 4 Mirage fighters, but even though the missile detonated almost right behind the plane's engine, the aircraft remained controllable, even though it was badly damaged. The pilot eventually managed to disengage and land the plane safely. The 4 additional Mirage fighters, ones that were on standby, were closing in as well, but 2 of those disengaged, as one suffered engine problems.
This is crazy.
Another pair of Mirage fighters was called in to replace them. The Phantoms continued their dogfight. One of the Israeli Phantom pilots...
It's just so rare you hear about dogfights outside of World War II. Obviously, there's a couple of different, different things during the Cold War and after post-Cold War even, but it's just so rare. I mean, so many dogfights obviously focus on World War II.
Got a chance to fire on a MiG. The Israeli pilot later went on to claim, "I realized the Russian pilot was not experienced. He didn't know how to handle his plane in a dogfight. He proved it by attempting to flee in a steep dive from an altitude of 15,000 feet. We simply had to follow him and have our radar lock onto him." So another MiG was downed. After several minutes of fuel-guzzling dogfight, the MiGs and some of the Mirage fighters were low on fuel and started to disengage. Those Israeli planes which had some fuel left pursued. By that time, the additional pair of Mirage fighters were also pursuing the same MiGs, but were unable to quickly close in on them. They fired a short-range heat seeker, but the distance was too great. In the meantime, the Phantoms fired a longer-ranged radar-guided Sparrow missile and shot down another MiG, stealing the kill away from the Mirage fighters.
Bro, imagine reading this report as just like, I don't know, just a U.S. general. You know, obviously it's probably classified, you're just reading about it, you're like, what? I'm imagining that gif of, what's that from Ratatouille? When he's like his eyes are getting big. I actually don't even know what that gif is from. He's probably just reading this line by line of all the different actions that took place. This must have been crazy to read about.
2 more Mirages were on the tail of one of the remaining MiGs that was flying away. They fired 3 heat-seeking missiles at it, with at least 1 direct hit, but the MiG kept flying. Eventually, one of the Mirages got the chance to empty its gun in the direction of the MiG, but the MiG still kept flying.
Damn!
It was only much later that it was discovered that the MiG did eventually suffer grave damage, and it crashed, with the pilot killed.
Dang.
The 2 different Mirage pilots were credited with a shared kill.
Israel pilots claimed the battle lasted 3 to 4 minutes. Soviet pilots claimed it lasted 6 minutes.
Some of the Soviet MiGs that were scrambled got to the area too late to join the fight, so it's unclear just how many actively participated in
12 to 16 MiGs, and then 4 F-4s, and then 8 Mirages.
the battle. The engagement caused bitter joy among Egyptian pilots, who were previously dismissed by the Soviets for failing to shoot down more Israeli aircraft.
Bruh, that's crazy. Egypt's like, yo, I told you they're good. What the hell?
But the Soviets had not shown themselves to be any better. Also, the loss of 3 pilots shook the Soviet leadership.
5 planes destroyed, 1 damaged, 3 pilots.
And their political support
versus just 1 plane damaged. Bro, Israel's good. I mean, if that's not obvious, like, Israel just... I mean, here's the thing. Since 1948, Israel has been this, like, you know, state surrounded by people that really don't want them there. And it should be no surprise that they still, you know, even to this day, have that mindset and have this sort of, like, underdog mentality. It's actually insane. But the fact that they still are able to accomplish things like this when they're heavily outnumbered, outgunned, outmoneyed, I mean, whatever it is, outsupported.
The whole operation was wavering. By late July, the Soviets started moving their surface-to-air units.
I don't know if they're ever outmoneyed. I mean, they do have a lot of support coming in, obviously, but...
It's closer to the Suez Canal and building fake defensive positions to confuse their enemies. This culminated in the last confrontation between Israeli and Soviet air forces on August the 3rd. In a carefully planned ambush, they deliberately exposed one of their most battered S-75 SAM units near the canal. With this exposed unit, they attacked enemy reconnaissance flights on the other side of the canal. When the Israeli Air Force tried to retaliate several hours later, previously hidden SAMs opened fire. The Israelis attacked in 2 waves. First one featured 28 Skyhawks and Phantoms, while the second one had 20 strike planes. The second wave suffered losses. The Soviets claimed 2 F-4 Phantoms downed.
Oh wow.
The Israelis acknowledged 1 loss, but said the other Phantom was damaged, and its pilot managed to land the plane.
That's twice that happened. I'm wondering how often that does happen, where Israel does take maybe heavier losses, but they just don't report it.
Even though he lost several fingers on one of his hands due to a missile detonating close to the plane.
That's crazy.
Egyptians claimed the Israeli attack did not cause significant damage.
That's so annoying that no one's willing to, like, say, you know, how do you just lose
But this time it was apparent to all sides that the war of attrition couldn't continue. The Israeli Air Force lost some of the most advanced fighter jets of that time. Golda Meir's government was aware they couldn't win a war against a superpower.
Like I said, yeah, they were not going to win that war against the superpower. They're just not going to, it's not going to be feasible. Now, they could maybe win small skirmishes, but if it's just the Soviet Union actually fully mobilizing, I mean, even though they'd have to, you know, move, I don't know how they're going to get their troops down there. I mean, the Soviets at this time, they're going to, I mean, at this point, Israel would have to bring in support from the other countries. Now, that's a completely different story, but if it's 1v1, well, the Soviets are going to have a lot more resources, and it's going to be pretty easy.
Both Soviet and Egyptian air defense personnel.
I mean, then again, the Soviet Union does end up losing a pretty, you know, long battle with Afghanistan. Who knows? But the losses Israel would take Also, considering they're surrounded by neighbors that despise them, that's kind of the bigger issue.
Were exhausted after months of non-stop action. In early August, Soviet Air Force Marshal Pavel Kutakov flew to Cairo and ordered termination of all Soviet flights over the Suez Canal.
Ooh.
The USSR notified Egypt it could no longer ensure the security of Egyptian Air Force. Simultaneously, they increased diplomatic pressure on Israel. Back in December 1969, the US Secretary of State William P. Rogers proposed a framework for a potential Arab-Israeli ceasefire. After 8 months, both sides finally signed the Rogers Plan on August 7, 1970. Even so, Egypt
But they still continue to occupy all that land, obviously.
immediately sent its SAM units closer to the Suez Canal zone. The Americans chose to overlook this as Egyptian President Nasser started opening up to the US to avoid relying on the USSR too much.
Nice. It sometimes seems like a fun time to be a little power like this. A game called Tropico, a franchise called Tropico, really talks about that a lot. Like, when you're a smaller power, like, obviously you can get demolished by two sides regardless. However, you can kind of play both sides, literally, so you can come out on top. You get first be allied to the Soviets, then start cuddling a little bit closer to America, then maybe go back and forth, and especially at this time, like, both were kind of dealing with some issues, like when they're both kind of downed. Obviously, you don't want to 1v1 any of these powers, but the U.S. is currently bogged down in Vietnam, and then you have the USSR dealing with their own struggles. It's going to get a lot worse for them in the 80s. You kind of get to play around with both of them, mess with their emotions. That's
Israelis
fun.
lost between 600 and 1,400 soldiers during the War of Attrition. Egypt's losses were far more substantial, losing between 2,800 and 10,000 people.
To be fair, Egypt has a lot more people. Israel does not. I mean, Israel, even when they take small casualties, they don't have that many actual people, especially in the 1970s.
According to various sources. Also, at least 58 Soviet soldiers lost their lives.
I'm sure there's probably a thing with Egypt where they're a lot more willing to send their people, just as meat grinders because they just have more. Same with the Soviets, same thing with the Chinese. Israel has always needed to be probably a little bit more careful with who they send to the meat grinder because they don't have all that many people.
According to Israel, Egypt lost between 98 and 114 aircraft. The Soviets claimed Egypt lost 60 aircraft. The Israelis said they lost up to 26 aircraft, while the Soviets claimed their side downed 40 Israeli planes. They also claimed their Soviet personnel downed 8 of those. There were naval skirmishes as well. During the war, Egypt lost 6 torpedo boats, while Israel lost 1 destroyer. Ultimately, the War of Attrition produced no clear winner. Both sides ended where they began. Egypt failed in its core objective of pushing the Israeli defense forces out of Sinai.
I don't know how many people lived in Sinai at this time, but currently there's about 600,000 people that live here, which is really shocking considering it is very barren. It is not a very fun place to live.
However, it also managed to organize and rebuild its air defense shield, in no small part thanks to the assistance of the Red Army. In September 1970, Egyptian President Nasser died. Former Vice President Anwar al-Sadat succeeded him.
Oh, yeah.
Sadat continued the ceasefire, all the while preparing for a full-scale attack on the Israeli forces on the eastern bank of the Suez Canal. This culminated in the Yom Kippur War 3 years later. As for the Soviet soldiers, by the end of 1970, their command started relieving them with fresh troops. While the new Egyptian President Sadat continued working with the USSR, he was dissatisfied with what he perceived as Soviet unwillingness to commit.
I can see
Finally,
that.
in July 1972, Sadat ordered all remaining Soviet troops to leave Egypt within a
Bro, it's
week.
just like, y'all are not doing anything. Just get the hell out. Just get the hell out of here.
Back home, Soviet airmen and soldiers received awards and commendations for their performance,
Oh my goodness.
but couldn't talk about their assignments.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, like I described the Cold War earlier, it's like that gif of the 2 dogs barking, but then as soon as you pull the gate back, they stop. They all of a sudden stop barking, and they're just kind of like chilling around, looking around. I mean, all kind of dogs do that, but that was the entirety of the Cold War. Like, everyone was too afraid a lot of the time to commit too much and to escalate too much, specifically with the other side, or I mean, obviously with the other side, but if the Soviets didn't think that Israel was going to be backed by the U.S., if if Israel was just like a neutral state, a non-aligned power. Well, first of all, I don't know if the Soviets would care that much. They probably would a little bit, but maybe they probably would have committed a lot more. Then again, even if it's a neutral power and you see your enemy, the Soviet Union, fighting this neutral state of Israel, I'm thinking in a hypothetical world. Well, if I'm the USA, I might want to, that guy was my friend before. He's a friend of my friend. Oh, sorry, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. There you go.
First stories about Red Army in Egypt were revealed only decades later, after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc.
Decades later. That's so crazy. Love Binkov's Battlegrounds because we get to deal with the map, and I love maps. I don't like to talk about wars without constantly looking at maps, so that's a big reason why I just absolutely love this channel. And here's a big thank you to this month's patrons. Can white people smell the rain? It's pronounced Tour de Sillas, Drew. DruuuWu Labubu. Conquered Bread. White Grape of the Pirates. Never change, Drew. Unless you want to. LuxembourgLover. Fredrik Tibblin. Pavlik. KingBearHaze. NordTyrol. LoreTrack. Name here. Nolan. Check the Patreon link down below in the description.